Under studio lights meant for laughter and applause, Arnold Schwarzenegger sat in silence, hands steady, eyes distant, a worn medal half hidden beneath his collar. He hadn't come to promote a film or relive old victories. He came wearing a relic no one expected, carrying a memory the cameras weren't ready for. When the host tried to joke about the medal on his chest, the smile on her face died before the punchline landed. But what kind of pain makes a man return to the spotlight, not to be seen, but to remember? Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Under the soft glare of studio lights, there was no music, no opening applause, just the hush that slips in when people aren't sure what comes next, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it presses. It lingers like something forgotten and suddenly remembered. Arnold Schwarzenegger sat still, center left, a silhouette carved out of decades. His black jacket was unzipped just enough for something metallic to glint faintly at his collar. It wasn't big, it wasn't meant to be seen, but it was there, small, round, worn at the edges. Across from him, Whoopi Goldberg leaned back with a grin wide enough to cut tension or maybe invite it. Her eyes danced as she leaned forward, tapping her cue card lightly against her knee. "Well," she said, playful, practiced, "looks like even the Terminator holds onto souvenirs." She pointed, mock casually, "What's that?" "Some old prop from the jungle days." A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. It wasn't loud, it was testing, the kind of laugh people offer when they're not sure if they're supposed to. Arnold didn't move, he didn't flinch. His hands stayed on his knees, solid, unmoved. Then slowly, without a word, he reached toward his collar and pulled out the medal. It wasn't flashy, just a dull coin-shaped pendant on a faded ribbon. He let it catch the light. "This," he said, his voice even low, not gravelly, not dramatic, just real, "belonged to my best friend, Hans." The name dropped like a stone into still water. He was a field medic, volunteered in Bosnia. "He wore this the last day I saw him." The grin slid from Whoopi's face, not all at once, but in pieces. Her eyes flickered. The audience didn't laugh, not now. A stillness spread through the rows like fog. Arnold didn't fill the silence. He let it breathe. He let it stand there, between them, between the lights, between every camera that kept rolling. "He gave it to me when I left Austria," Arnold continued. "Said, keep this until I come back. If I don't, remember I tried to make something right." One camera operator briefly adjusted focus. A whisper in the control booth, "Don't cut yet." Arnold rolled the medal slowly between his fingers, not for effect, for memory. "I don't wear it for nostalgia," he said. "I wear it because forgetting feels like betrayal." Someone in the third row shifted in their seat, then stilled. Even the air seemed slower, heavier. Whoopi opened her mouth, but no sound came. She looked down at her cards as if trying to find a different lane. None appeared. Arnold looked out, not at her, not at the co-hosts, but past them, as if he was seeing something long buried, or someone. "I didn't come here to be clever," he said. "I didn't come to charm anyone." His voice didn't rise. "I came to honor someone who can't speak anymore." The audience didn't clap. There was nothing performative to applaud, only presence, only pain that had learned to stand upright. From somewhere backstage, a floor manager muttered, "Do we go to break?" The director shook his head, eyes fixed on the monitor. "Not yet." Arnold looked down at the medal, thumb brushing across the scratches time had left. "Some things," he said, quieter now, "aren't meant to be silenced." And in that moment, on a stage built for punchlines, made for applause, nobody moved. Because a man wasn't performing, he was remembering, and everyone could feel the weight of what hadn't been said yet. 2 days earlier, the sun had barely begun to settle behind the Brentwood Hills when the email arrived. The subject line read plainly, "The View, invitation to discuss legacy and values." Nothing bold, nothing flashy, but Arnold stared at it longer than he needed to. He didn't click right away. He just sat at his desk, elbows resting on the edge, hands clasped as if in silent negotiation. The room around him was quiet, not because of absence, but because of history. On the wall behind him, framed photographs hung in uneven rows, snapshots of decades, some political, some cinematic, one or two personal, but none told the whole story. Tony, his longtime publicist, entered holding a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. He set it down without speaking, then turned the laptop screen gently toward himself. "They're not inviting you to talk," he said, dry. "They're baiting you." Arnold said nothing. Tony leaned on the edge of the desk. "They want the old version, the accent, the punchlines, the walking contradiction who once ran a state and shot aliens on screen. They'll poke until you either explode or look outdated. That's the clip they're after." Still nothing. Tony sighed. "They're not here for the man who buried friends. They want the myth, the meme." Arnold's eyes moved slowly to the left corner of the room. A small wooden chest sat on a lower shelf, unmarked, ordinary, but his gaze lingered on it like it held something still breathing. After a pause, he stood, no dramatic gesture, no sigh of resolve, just the quiet certainty of muscle that remembered how to carry weight. He walked across the room and knelt beside the chest, opened it. Inside, neatly wrapped in old linen, lay a pair of worn-out hand wraps. Coarse, frayed, stained with time, he unwrapped them like they were fragile. "These," he said, not looking up, "were Hans's from the gym in Thal. We used to run barefoot uphill at 5 a.m. Then wrap up and hit the bag until our knuckles bled." Tony stayed silent. This was not a story Arnold told often, not because it hurt, but because it didn't need to be told unless someone was ready to listen. Arnold stood slowly, the wraps resting in his palm. "He told me once," Arnold said, "that the body forgets pain faster than the mind, but the hands remember." He placed the wraps on the desk, then reached into the chest again and retrieved a small, battered medal, the same one he would later wear on stage. He didn't polish it, didn't pose with it, just looked at it like it was a photograph no one else could see. "He volunteered after his mother died," Arnold said, voice low. "Said he couldn't lift weights while the world was on fire. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't carry a gun. He carried medicine. He carried children." Tony leaned forward slightly. "You sure you want to go on that show?" Arnold finally looked at him, calm, steady. "I'm not going to fight," he said, "but I'm not walking in unarmed." Tony didn't smile. He nodded once, then quietly left the room, pulling the door closed behind him. Left alone, Arnold sat back down, the medal in one hand, the wraps in the other. There was no speech, no practice, no mirrors. Just a man looking at the two objects that tethered him to the version of himself no one ever asked about. Outside, the last of the sun slipped behind the horizon. Inside, the silence deepened, not the silence of absence, but the kind that builds when something old begins to stir again. And for the first time in years, Arnold didn't feel like preparing lines. He felt like remembering. The studio was colder than expected, not in temperature, but in tone. Everything gleamed too brightly, glass tables polished within an inch of fiction, lights angled to flatter, not reveal. Arnold sat in the guest chair as crew members adjusted cameras and clipped hidden mics beneath his collar. He said little. The medal, still hanging around his neck, rested against his chest, just below the line of visibility. Not hidden, not shown, just there. The hand wraps remained in his bag backstage, folded the same way Hans had once taught him. Left over right, tight but not cruel, enough to hold, not to strangle. A young assistant offered him water, smiled too brightly and whispered, "Big fan." He nodded once, polite, but his eyes didn't change. Across the set, the co-hosts gathered like seasoned players before a well-rehearsed performance. Whoopi stood a little off to the side, flipping through her cue cards, her posture relaxed, but eyes sharp. She'd done this too many times not to sense the unspoken. When the floor manager called for silence, it was like watching a switch flip. Laughter softened, movements stilled. The red light blinked to life above the main camera. The show had begun. The opening segment passed in predictable rhythm, banter about headlines, a viral video, a passing joke about AI making better breakfast than husbands. The audience responded on cue. But something in the tempo stuttered when Arnold was introduced. The applause came, respectful, warm, but not frenzied. There was no grand entrance. He was already seated. Whoopi leaned in with a smile designed for disarmament. Her tone was honeyed steel. "So, Arnold," she began, drawing out the vowels, "you've played soldiers, robots, governors, pretty much everything except a monk. Laughter trickled in, guided by the rhythm of the room. She tilted her head, teasing but targeted. Tell me, when did the Terminator start wearing relics like a priest? More laughter, a little louder this time. Arnold didn't blink, he waited, let the air settle. Some people wear things to be noticed, he said quietly. I wear this to remember. The laughter faltered. A few co-hosts shifted in their seats. Whoopi raised an eyebrow, pretending to be intrigued. Remember what? She pressed. He reached slowly, pulled the medal from under his collar, and held it in the flat of his palm. Hans, he said, my best friend, he wore this the last day I saw him alive. Silence didn't fall. It entered, soft, intrusive, undeniable. The studio didn't know what to do with it. The control room didn't either. Arnold spoke again, not louder but deeper. We trained together in Thal. We wrapped our hands with torn cloth. We shared protein when we couldn't afford bread. When he left for Bosnia, he said he wasn't going to fight. He was going to heal. That was the last thing he said. He let the sentence finish itself. A cough echoed from somewhere in the back. A host cleared their throat too quickly. Whoopi tried to steer the mood. That got heavy fast, she said with a forced chuckle. But you've always had that serious side, haven't you, even in the movies? Arnold didn't look at her. His eyes found a point in the distance, maybe memory, maybe something else. Movies taught people I was indestructible, he said, but real strength isn't what you lift, it's what you carry. The audience didn't move. A phone that had been filming lowered itself, almost reverently. Arnold placed the medal gently on the table beside him, not for display, for rest. Whoopi opened her mouth again, but the rhythm was gone. Whatever tempo she had rehearsed had been disrupted by something quieter, heavier. I didn't come here to impress, Arnold said, voice level. I didn't come to entertain. He paused. I came because grief doesn't know how to schedule itself. And sometimes it needs a voice that doesn't shake. This time no one laughed, not even Whoopi. He reached down beside the chair. No one noticed at first. The camera didn't follow. The hosts kept their smiles fixed like storefront mannequins, unsure whether the glass had cracked. But Arnold's movement was slow, deliberate. He unzipped the canvas bag with the kind of care people reserve for sacred things. The soft rasp of the zipper was the only sound in the studio. Then he lifted them out, 2 old hand wraps, faded, torn, stained along the edges where knuckles had once pushed through cloth. They didn't look like much, just scraps, really. But the way he held them made the room lean forward. These, he said softly, aren't from a film set. He laid them on the table, between himself and the hosts, like a quiet offering. I wore these the day I found out Hans died. The wraps lay there motionless, but they held weight, not in ounces, in years. The lights above dimmed slightly, not intentionally, but as if even the rigging understood that this moment required a different kind of brightness. Arnold didn't look at anyone when he spoke. He looked at the wraps. I remember the phone call. It was short, just a name, a location, a sentence that didn't finish before I stopped hearing. He swallowed once, but his voice never trembled. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't even speak. I went to the gym. He glanced up just for a second, not to escape, to remember. A cough echoed faintly from backstage, then stilled. I wrapped my hands, he continued, the same way he taught me, left over right, just tight enough to hold, and I hit the bag until the leather split. The room didn't gasp, it breathed in together. A single inhale that never fully exhaled. Every punch, Arnold said, was a prayer I didn't know how to say. He ran a thumb gently across the edge of the cloth, now worn soft with time. I didn't do it for catharsis. I did it because grief has a rhythm. And that day, the only beat I could find was the sound of my fists. No one interrupted, not the hosts, not the crew, not the control room. Even Whoopi didn't reach for a comeback, she just watched. Arnold finally looked up again. Not at them, but through them. We always trained together in silence, he said. No headphones, no music, just the sound of breath and impact. That's how you knew someone was still with you. You could hear them. He let the line settle. After he died, I trained alone, but in my head he was still next to me. Same pace, same breathing. He leaned back slightly, the wraps still resting on the table like folded memory. I kept them, he said, not for motivation, not to inspire some comeback narrative. His voice lowered. I kept them because they remind me that strength doesn't erase pain, it carries it. Someone in the second row put a hand over their mouth. A young intern by the stage door blinked hard, her headset forgotten. Arnold didn't shift in his seat, he just let the moment widen. I've made movies about machines, he said, characters that take bullets and never fall. But in real life, when the people you love disappear, there's no reshoot, there's no new take. His hand rested gently on the wraps. There's just the question, what do I do with what's left? The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, holy, the kind you don't fill with applause because applause would break it. The host stared at the wraps, not like props, but like artifacts, things unearthed from someone else's pain, offered without demand. Arnold spoke one last time. I don't carry these for nostalgia. I carry them because survival has a shape. Sometimes it's not medals or muscles or words. He looked down. Sometimes it's just cloth that remembers the weight of what your hands couldn't hold. No one moved. The wraps stayed exactly where he placed them, two simple pieces of fabric that refused to be forgotten. And for the first time in that studio's history, grief wasn't edited out. It was invited in, and it stayed. From somewhere near the back of the studio, a chair creaked. It wasn't loud. It didn't interrupt. It simply announced that someone unexpected was standing. Heads turned. He looked to be in his late 60s. Denim jacket, hands weathered like rope. He didn't ask to speak. He just started. He's not just an actor, the man said, voice scratchy but sure. Not to me. The studio crew froze. No cue had been given. A producer in the wings began to raise a hand, but the director whispered, "Let it roll." The man stepped slowly into the aisle. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. His eyes stayed on Arnold. I trained at Gold's Gym, he said, summer of '71. They brought in some of us amateurs to help with background shots. Sparring, fill the frame. He chuckled, but it didn't catch. The room was still listening. I didn't know who he was back then. Just some guy with a busted lip and too much heart. Arnold didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched, the wraps still resting between them like witnesses. That guy, the man continued, voice cracking, never asked for a spotlight. He outworked everyone, bled with us, stayed after filming to talk to kids who didn't have fathers, not to impress, just to listen. His eyes dropped for a second, then lifted again. I lost my son in Iraq, he said. The room tightened. Didn't say much about it. People expect you to move on. Smile when someone thanks you for your sacrifice. Pretend you don't hear your own silence at night. A pause. But today, seeing someone carry grief like it's not weakness, that matters. He didn't cry, he didn't collapse. He just nodded, once, and returned to his seat. The chair let out another quiet groan as he lowered himself, like the weight he carried had grown heavier in the telling. No one clapped, not because they weren't moved, but because they were, and they knew clapping would fracture the stillness that had formed like a shell around the moment. Arnold bowed his head slightly, not in performance, not in acknowledgement. Just presence. Whoopi glanced toward the back row, her cue cards limp in her hand. There was something unreadable in her expression now, less control, more reflection. The gloves and the wraps sat unmoving on the table. The air inside the studio felt warmer now, not from heat, but from something more human. The audience wasn't watching a guest anymore. They were witnessing a memory passed hand to hand, story to story. A woman in the third row leaned toward her friend and whispered, "This feels different." Her voice didn't break the silence, it joined it. Even the cameras adjusted without instruction, reframing to catch not reaction shots, but reverence. Arnold finally looked up again. His eyes moved slowly across the room, not scanning for attention, but connection. "I've never wanted to be a symbol," he said, his voice low. "I just didn't want to forget." He reached for the wraps again, not to pick them up, but to center them gently, like one might straighten a photograph on a mantle. "Grief doesn't ask for permission," he said. "It just shows up. And if we're lucky, we find someone else carrying a piece of it too." There was no piano swell, no spotlight dimming. just the quiet sound of a room full of people still leaning forward, not for answers, but for something they hadn't expected to feel on a Tuesday morning. The man in the denim jacket looked down at his hands. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His words were still in the air, and Arnold's silence made them stay. It didn't come from the front rows or from the seats where cameras might easily pan. It came from off-center, near the edge of the studio where shadows lingered longer than stage lights. A voice, young, uncertain, broke the quiet. "I used to believe in something." Heads turned. Even Arnold's eyes lifted, not out of surprise, but out of recognition. He knew the weight behind that kind of voice. The young man who stood couldn't have been more than 20, hoodie pulled tight around his shoulders, hands twisting the hem of his sleeve like he was trying to keep them from shaking. He didn't wait for a mic. He didn't ask for permission. He just kept talking. "My mom used to tell me that pain had a purpose, that we were meant to carry it, not run from it." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "I believed her, I did, even after my brother enlisted, even after the letters stopped." The silence that followed was thick, almost metallic, like the air itself had weight. "I stopped going to church," he said, "stopped calling it prayer. I thought if I just stayed angry long enough, it'd feel like strength." He looked directly at Arnold now. "But then you talked about hitting the bag, about not knowing what to say, so you just let your hands speak." He paused. "I don't know if I believe again, not in God, not in meaning, not yet, but right now." His voice caught. He swallowed hard. "Right now, I kind of want to try." It wasn't a dramatic mic drop. It wasn't a scripted redemption arc. It was something quieter, something far more dangerous in this world. It was earnest. No one applauded. No one told him he was brave. They just listened. And somehow that felt more sacred. Arnold stood, not fast, not slow, just enough to be noticed. He didn't walk all the way to the boy. He stopped 2 rows away. No spotlight followed him. No music played. He looked the young man in the eye and said gently, "Then you've already started." The boy's shoulders shook once, just once, but he didn't crumble. He stood taller. Not because the room saw him, but because, for the first time, it felt like it heard him. Arnold turned to face the audience. His voice didn't rise, it deepened. "I didn't come here to change anyone's mind." He looked slowly from one face to another. "I came because someone out there might need to hear a voice that sounds like survival." There was no echo, no response, just breath held, suspended. The young man sat back down. The row around him didn't pat his back or applaud. They reached out, quietly, hands resting on his shoulders, his arm, his knee, not to comfort, to connect. The air inside the studio shifted again, not louder, just truer. Whoopi hadn't moved. Her note cards were still in her lap, untouched, but her posture had changed. She wasn't leaning forward. She was sitting back, shoulders slightly hunched, as if something fragile had been placed in the room and she was afraid of breaking it. Arnold returned to his seat. The gloves and wraps were still on the table, but now they weren't relics. They were proof that someone had made it through the fire. Not unburned, but unhidden. A single light from above flickered slightly, not in malfunction, but like the stage itself had exhaled. And somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "This doesn't feel like a show anymore." They were right, it didn't. It felt like something older than television, something heavier than format. A room full of people, young, old, grieving, angry, watching a man refuse to polish his pain, and in doing so, giving everyone else permission not to polish theirs. For the first time all morning, there was no need for transition, no need for commercial break, because the most human thing in the room had finally taken the mic and said nothing it didn't mean. Whoopi shifted in her seat. She wasn't leaning forward anymore. Her hands rested on her cue cards, but she didn't look at them. The rhythm she'd relied on, her practiced wit, the timing built from decades on camera, had unraveled. What remained wasn't control. It was something quieter. She cleared her throat. "So what now?" she asked. The words weren't sharp, but they carried the weight of someone trying to find footing. "You come in here with raps and medals and pain, and suddenly you're a moral compass." There was no laughter, no bounce from the audience. Even she didn't smile when she said it. Arnold didn't respond immediately. He let the question hang, let it drift and settle. I didn't bring stories, he said, voice calm. I brought what was real. She blinked, her expression tightened. You've played gods and warriors. You've stood on podiums and box office charts. Now you want people to believe you're just a man with grief. He looked at her, not with defiance, not with pity, just with presence. Grief doesn't go away just because the camera stops rolling. A few people in the audience nodded. One near the back whispered, "That's true." I'm not clinging to pain, Arnold continued. I'm carrying it, because pretending it didn't happen, that would be the real performance. It landed hard, not as a rebuke, as a truth too heavy to dismiss. Whoopi opened her mouth again, then closed it. Her hands fidgeted with the cue cards, flipping them, then folding them in half. They no longer had weight. This was supposed to be light, she muttered. Arnold heard her. Light doesn't mean false, he said, and the truth doesn't always shine. Sometimes it bleeds through the cracks. There was no applause, just the hum of studio lights and the faint sound of fabric shifting as people leaned forward. One of the co-hosts, silent until now, spoke softly. He's not wrong. Whoopi glanced sideways, then back at Arnold. Her expression had softened, not surrendered, disarmed. I didn't come here to fight, he said, repeating himself. But I didn't come here to stay silent. And this time, no one mistook him for the Terminator. No one mistook the raps for props. No one mistook the silence for emptiness. For the first time, the host of the show looked like a guest, and the guest, like a mirror none of them expected to face. The moment held, then a screen behind them, meant for graphics and sponsor ads, flickered. A mistake, accidental, but irreversible. White text on black background. I'm a Marine. I lost my best friend in Afghanistan. I was going to end things tonight. But watching Arnold talk about pain like it's not weakness, maybe I'll wait one more day. A collective inhale swept through the room. One moment, one breath, one decision that no one saw coming. Arnold turned to the screen slowly. He didn't blink. He didn't perform. He felt. He stood, walked toward the camera, not as a celebrity, but as someone who understood. Not the specifics, but the silence. If you're watching, he said, steady, I don't know your name. I don't know your story. He glanced once at the gloves, then back. But I know what it's like when the pain owns the room. A hush wrapped the studio. You don't have to believe in me, he said, but believe in this. You're still breathing, and that's not nothing. He paused, took one step forward. Don't leave this world yet, not until you punch back at least once. He didn't say more. He didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was sacred, reverent. The kind of silence that belongs to funerals or awakenings. Arnold turned, walked back to his seat. The gloves remained on the table, and now no one saw them as symbols of loss. They were anchors, proof that someone survived, and left the silence behind for others to stand in, together.